But the warmth faded as soon as they stepped inside. Dave slumped into my late husband's armchair without a word, switching on the television. Dawn barely looked at me, her green dress neat, her face cold as marble. When I stepped into the courtroom that morning, the air felt heavy, almost electric. My daughter, Dawn, whispered something to her husband and rolled her eyes as if the entire trial were just another inconvenience. I kept my head high, clutching the handle of my worn leather purse, the same one I had carried for decades. When I read the word transfer on the document, my blood ran cold. "I thought you were selling the house," I whispered. Dawn avoided my eyes. "We decided to keep it in the family," she said, echoing Dave's lies. It hit me then. They weren't helping me. They were stealing from me. "I'm not signing anything," I said, voice trembling but firm. Dave's mask cracked, his voice turning sharp. "You're not capable of living alone, Mave. Dawn is acting in your best interest." My heart pounded in my chest as I realized what they planned. To take my home and declare me unfit to stop them, my heart skipped. After searching his old books, I found a tiny key tucked inside a page about property investments. When the lock clicked open, I felt the world tilt. Inside were documents I didn't recognize: deeds, certificates, and a will dated 6 months before his death. She was giving it away, just like that. My voice trembled, pleading, "Dawn, this is our home. All our memories are here." She didn't even flinch. "Memories are in the heart, Mom, not on the walls." Dave smiled smugly, his eyes already measuring the rooms like a buyer at an auction. My hands trembled as I read. He had invested quietly for decades, buying small properties, company shares, even land that was now worth millions. Every signature, every note was in his handwriting. The will stated that I, and I alone, was the heir. Dawn would inherit nothing unless she cared for me with love and respect. I froze. My husband had foreseen everything: Dave's greed, Dawn's weakness, and had built an invisible wall to protect me. For 45 years, I worked nights cleaning offices and sold homemade cupcakes on weekends, all so my daughter Dawn could go to college and have the future I never did. I mended her dresses by candlelight, skipped meals to pay her tuition, and smiled through exhaustion because love made the sacrifice sweet. Every eye turned toward me, and I could feel the weight of their curiosity pressing on my chest. They didn't know who I really was, or what I had lived through to reach this point. My past, the one I had buried for years, was about to resurface under the harsh courtroom lights. That single moment would change everything, forever. I didn't sleep that night, but this time it wasn't fear that kept me awake. It was clarity. I laid every document across the table, tracing my husband's handwriting until I could almost hear his voice guiding me. The grief that once paralyzed me was replaced by a calm resolve. Dawn and Dave thought they had stripped me of everything, but they had no idea what I now possessed: power, proof, purpose. I wasn't going to scream or beg anymore. I was going to plan. My husband had left me not just wealth, but a map of justice disguised as love. By morning, the fear was gone. I brewed my coffee in the chipped mug I'd used for 20 years and smiled for the first time in months. It was time to show them who they were dealing with. At the bottom of the folder was a letter, written in his familiar looping script. "My dearest Mave," it began. "If you're reading this, it means you've finally found what I left for you. I wanted you to live without fear, to remember your worth. Be strong, my love. Use what I've built not for revenge, but for justice." Tears fell onto the paper as I whispered his name. For the first time in months, I didn't feel powerless. I felt seen. Over the following weeks, the air between us began to change. Dawn no longer walked on eggshells. Instead, she worked quietly, washing dishes after every meal, tending to the violets her father once loved. Each morning, she joined me for tea, sitting in the same chair where Dave used to sit. Only now, the silence was peaceful instead of tense. One afternoon, as sunlight poured through the kitchen window, she spoke softly. "Mum, I need to tell you everything." What followed was a confession that broke my heart all over again. Dawn told me how Dave had slowly isolated her, how he had made her quit her job, take control of her money, and cut off her friends. "I thought it was love," she said through tears. "He told me a good wife didn't need anyone else." I listened without interrupting, even when the pain in her words felt like a mirror of my own old mistakes. When she finished, she looked up at me, eyes red but clear. "I know now what you meant about love and respect. I should have trusted you." I reached across the table and took her hand. "We can't change what's done," I said, "but we can make sure your child never learns love that way." She nodded, and for the first time, I saw strength instead of fear in her eyes. The past still hurt, but something new was growing in its place, something fragile, honest, and real. 2 weeks later, peace shattered like glass. Dawn answered the intercom, her face turning pale. "It's Dave," she whispered. He stood in the lobby downstairs, shouting that he had a right to see his wife. I could hear his voice echoing through the hall, full of anger and desperation. "She's keeping me away. This is kidnapping," he yelled, drawing curious stares from the neighbors. I took a deep breath and went downstairs myself. He looked worse than I remembered. Unshaven, eyes bloodshot, pride stripped bare. "You can't keep her from me," he growled. "She's still my wife." I met his glare with quiet authority. "Not in this building, she's not." That Thursday afternoon, I set the dining table with my best lace cloth, the one I had embroidered when Dawn was a teenager. A pot of chicken and dumplings simmered on the stove, the recipe she used to beg for when she was little. I even bought fresh flowers, hoping to see that smile I hadn't seen in years. When the doorbell rang, my heart leapt. Dave's last weapon was pride. "You can't throw me out. I'm part of this family," he shouted, his voice cracking. "Family?" I said softly. "Family doesn't threaten, lie, or steal." The words struck him harder than any slap. He turned toward Dawn for help, but she only shook her head. "I'm done choosing you over the woman who raised me," she whispered. Something inside him broke then. His face twisted between rage and disbelief. "My name is Mave Williams, and for most of my 69 years, I lived an ordinary life that felt quietly complete. Each morning, I brewed my coffee in a chipped white mug and stood by the kitchen window, watching the sunlight spill across the violets my late husband adored. The rhythm of those small rituals was my comfort, watering the plants, folding the linen, humming to the radio. When the door slammed behind him, the entire house seemed to exhale. Dawn fell into my arms, sobbing for everything she'd lost and everything she was still trying to save. I held her, though my heart was torn between relief and grief. The silence that followed wasn't peace yet. It was the fragile stillness before healing. Dave's confidence evaporated. I could see the calculation flickering in his eyes as he tried to mask fear. I continued, my tone calm but deadly. "You thought you could take my home? This house is the least valuable property I own." Dawn's trembling hands reached for the papers. She read and reread them, her voice cracking. This can't be real." I smiled softly. Oh, it's very real. Dave's anger returned, his voice shaking. You forged these. You're welcome to verify them, I said. In fact, I insist. Dawn sank onto the sofa as the truth settled. Why didn't you ever tell us? She whispered. I met her eyes, and for the first time she saw me, not as an old woman, but as her mother, whole and unbroken. Mum, we need to talk, she said in that clipped voice she'd learned from him. This house is too big for you. You can't maintain it alone, and we need more space for when we have kids. For a moment, I thought I hadn't heard right. My breath caught, and I stared at the home that held every memory of our lives, her first steps, her father's laughter, our birthdays. I walked to the desk and took out several documents, placing them neatly before them. Did you know, I said, that the apartment you've been living in for 3 years was never paid to its real owner? Confusion crossed Dawn's face. What are you talking about? You've been paying rent, I explained, to a management company that deposits directly into my account because I own the entire building. Silence. I brought back what I took, she whispered. Inside were my mother's jewelry, the wedding ring, the gold chain, the earrings my husband gave me. Her hands shook as she placed them on the table between us. I don't expect you to forgive me, she said, but I can't live knowing I became the kind of person Dad would have been ashamed of. Her words cut deeper than any insult Dave had ever thrown. That night, the house felt different, quieter, gentler, as if it too were exhausted from all the shouting. Dawn stayed in her old bedroom, the same one I had left untouched since her wedding day. I could hear her crying softly through the thin walls. For the first time in years, her sobs didn't make me angry. They made me ache. When morning came, she appeared in the doorway holding a small velvet bag. When he laughed bitterly, I pulled out my phone and called my lawyer, Victoria, putting her on speaker. Can you confirm I'm the legal owner of this property? I asked. Her voice came crisp and clear. Yes, Mrs. Williams. You are the sole owner. Dave's expression faltered as reality sank in. I smiled faintly. Anything else you need clarified? I'm not leaving any more, I replied, setting my cup down with deliberate grace. Dave's smirk faltered. Mrs. Williams, we've discussed this, he said sharply. You don't have a choice. I rose slowly and met his eyes. You're right, Dave. I don't. But neither do you. The words sliced the air like thunder. That night, I couldn't sleep. My house, half-packed and hollow, echoed with the ghosts of laughter that once filled it. Desperate for comfort, I began sorting through my late husband's old desk, touching each drawer like it still held his warmth. Beneath a stack of faded receipts, I found a small folder with a brass lock and his initials engraved on it. For a long moment, no one moved. The sound of the rain outside filled the silence between us. Then I spoke quietly, the calm after thunder. You've both had your say. Now you'll listen to mine. My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. The truth carried its own strength. I told Dave that his manipulations were over, that the law and his arrogance no longer protected him. Dawn stood trembling beside me, realizing at last who had been her ally all along. When Judge Morales entered, the room fell silent. She was a woman of composure and quiet authority until her eyes met mine. A flicker of recognition crossed her face. I remembered her then, not as a judge, but as a frightened young mother I had once helped when I volunteered at the shelter years ago. Our eyes met briefly, a silent exchange of gratitude and understanding. Life didn't return to what it once was. It became something new, stronger, softer, honest. We had walked through betrayal, loss, and justice, and somehow found grace on the other side. As Serenity slept peacefully in my arms, I realized that redemption isn't about erasing pain. It's about turning it into love that finally knows its worth. The murmurs stopped when the judge entered, but the moment he saw me, everything changed. His face went pale, his hand froze mid-motion, and in a trembling voice, he said, "It's her." The courtroom fell silent. The trial began with Dave's lawyer spewing rehearsed venom about toxic maternal manipulation. But every lie only exposed his cruelty further. Dawn spoke next, her voice trembling at first, then steady as she described years of control and deceit. I didn't need to defend myself. Truth did that for me. Monday morning came with soft rain tapping against the windows, the kind that seemed to cleanse the world. I was ready. I sat calmly in my armchair, tea in hand, when Dawn and Dave arrived with movers expecting submission. They froze when they saw me so composed. "Mom, what are you doing? The movers are already here," Dawn said impatiently. In the weeks that followed, peace began to bloom quietly in the corners of our home. Dawn spent her mornings painting the nursery, humming soft lullabies, while I returned to tending the violets by the window. There was no sudden miracle of forgiveness, only small moments that stitched our bond back together. She apologized not just with words, but with actions. A shared meal, a gentle hug, a quiet thank you whispered before bed. I believed that devotion would be enough, that one day she'd understand the cost of her dreams. But love, I would learn, doesn't always come back the way you give it. When the storm finally broke, it wasn't with shouting, but with truth. Dawn's tears came fast as she faced Dave, who stood red-faced and furious. "It was all his idea," she confessed. "He told me you were losing your mind, Mom." The air in the room seemed to thicken, every lie of the past weeks collapsing under its own weight. Dave spun toward her, livid. "Don't you dare put this on me." But Dawn was beyond fear now. "You used me," she said. "You made me believe hurting my own mother was love." The courthouse smelled faintly of polished wood and nerves. It had been months since I'd stood in front of so many people, yet this time, I wasn't the one trembling. Dave sat across the aisle with his lawyer, his expression defiant but hollow. He had filed for custody of the unborn child, claiming Dawn was unfit under her mother's influence. The accusation might have broken me once, not anymore. I sat beside Dawn, who held my hand so tightly I could feel the pulse of her courage. The day we left the courthouse, the air felt different, lighter, as if the city itself exhaled with us. Dawn walked beside me, one hand resting gently on her round belly, her other still clutching mine. For months, fear had been her shadow. Now, for the first time, she looked forward instead of back. I could see traces of the little girl she used to be, the one who used to run barefoot through the garden, her laughter echoing like a promise of joy. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The silence between us was heavy, but not hostile. It was the silence of rebuilding, one breath at a time. "Sit," I finally said, pulling out a chair. She sat, her shoulders small and trembling. "You can stay the night," I told her, my voice steady. "But tomorrow, we'll talk about what comes next. Forgiveness isn't a gift. It's something you earn." Dawn nodded, tears spilling freely now. "I'll earn it, Mum," she whispered. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I believed her. Sometimes, I still caught myself staring at the framed photo of my late husband on my desk. "We did it, love," I would whisper. His vision, his faith in me, had rippled far beyond our family. The home he built with love had become a sanctuary for dozens of forgotten souls. a living legacy born from pain, transformed into grace. The following week, they came back with papers and a lawyer I'd never seen before. Dave walked in like he already owned the place, followed by Dawn, her face tight with guilt she refused to admit. The lawyer's tone was polite, but cold. "We just need your signature, Mrs. Williams. It's for your own safety." It started small. A few elderly women from my church who confided their heartbreaks to me. Some were cast aside by their children, others stripped of their homes and dignity. I listened, comforted, and realized that my story was theirs too. That was when I founded the Home and Dignity Foundation, a refuge for women like us. What began in my living room with 3 women and a pot of tea grew into a network of houses across the state. When she handed me the invitation to the ceremony, I saw tears glisten in her eyes. "You once believed in me when I doubted myself," she said softly. "It's my turn to return that faith." I smiled, humbled. For the first time in years, I felt that the world had come full circle, stitching together justice, kindness, and destiny in one quiet morning. When baby Serenity was born, the world seemed to pause. I held her tiny body in my arms, and all the bitterness I had carried melted like frost under the sun. Dawn cried softly, her head resting on my shoulder. "She has your eyes, Mom," she said, and I smiled through tears. It was a quiet morning when the doorbell rang, breaking the soft hum of the garden outside. Dawn wiped her hands on her apron and opened the door, only to return with a knowing smile. Standing there was Judge Elena Morales, now retired, holding a bouquet of lilies and accompanied by her husband. "Mrs. Williams," she greeted warmly, "I don't know if you remember me." When the judge finally spoke, her tone was firm, yet compassionate. "This court recognizes the emotional abuse sustained by Mrs. Foster and the malicious intent behind Mr. Foster's actions." She paused, looking directly at me before continuing. "Justice has a way of returning home." Her verdict ended it all. Full custody to Dawn, restraining order for Dave. As the gavel struck, Dawn broke down in relief. I held her as the courtroom blurred around us. After years of silence, fear, and loss, justice had spoken, and it sounded like peace. Of course I did. Her kindness in the courtroom had changed the course of our lives. We sat together on the porch, the same spot where Dawn and Serenity liked to play. She explained that the Retired Judges Association wanted to honor me for my work with the foundation, an award for justice through compassion. I was stunned. I had never sought recognition, only peace. I realized that forgiveness isn't about forgetting or pretending the wound never existed. It's about letting the heart breathe again. We are all made of stories, and sometimes the ones that hurt the most are the ones that save us. As the night settled in, I whispered a silent thank you. To life, to love, to every storm that taught me how to stand again. Dawn joined me with 2 cups of tea, handing one to me without a word. "Do you ever wish things had been different?" she asked quietly. I smiled. "No. If they were, we might never have learned who we really are." She leaned her head on my shoulder, and we watched the last light fade. Through the window, the garden glowed faintly under the moonlight. The violets he had loved were blooming again, proof that even fragile things can return stronger after a storm. I lifted my teacup, the chipped mug that had seen every season of my life, and whispered a quiet prayer of thanks. Each story broke me open a little more, but it also healed something inside. I saw resilience in their eyes, the same fire that had once carried me through betrayal and loss. We offered more than shelter. We gave them purpose, teaching crafts, hosting community dinners, helping them reconnect with their families. Dawn became the foundation's accountant, balancing ledgers by day and volunteering by night. Watching her guide others, I saw redemption come full circle. For the first time in years, my heart carried no bitterness, only gratitude. I had learned that strength isn't loud, it's the quiet decision to keep going, to keep loving, even when the world seems cruel. My story had started in tears, but ended in peace. And as I closed my eyes, I knew one simple truth. It's never too late to reclaim your dignity, rewrite your story, and live the ending you deserve. When night fell, the house settled into the kind of silence that only peace can create. Serenity slept soundly in her little room, clutching the stuffed rabbit I had sewn for her, while Dawn tidied up the kitchen with quiet grace. I sat in my favourite armchair, the same one where I had once cried in despair, now a throne of calm reflection. The clock ticked softly, marking the rhythm of a life rebuilt from ashes. 5 years passed, and the house that once echoed with sorrow now hummed with laughter, purpose, and quiet strength. Dawn had flourished. She balanced motherhood, work, and compassion, with a grace that reminded me of her father. Little Serenity filled every corner with joy, her laughter like sunlight spilling into every room. But my own life had taken a path I never could have imagined. The pain that once nearly destroyed me had become the seed of something beautiful. That evening, after Judge Morales's visit, I sat by the window, watching the sunset bleed into shades of amber and rose. Dawn was in the kitchen, helping Serenity with her homework, their laughter blending with the soft ticking of the old clock. I thought about the path that had brought us here, the years of silence, anger, forgiveness, and the slow rebuilding of faith. Pain had once been my language. Now it was simply a memory that taught me how to listen. When they left, I sat in my husband's armchair and finally let the tears fall, hot and heavy, the sound of betrayal echoing through the empty rooms.